Ladies and gentlemen, mesdames, messieurs, brothers and sisters, comrades and fellow travelers, welcome to Meet the Blessed, a show that examines culture, politics, news, and of course religion through an Orthodox lens. It's like Meet the Press, but blessed. This week, we have Jonathan from the Eschaton Vigil and Conrad Franz from World War Now joining to talk about some of the prophecies of World War III that the Orthodox Church has made. And of course, talking about the end times, the signs of the end times that are circulating, and of course, is a constant conversation at coffee hour. I don't know about your parish, but I know it gets brought up at mine, so something to talk about at least. Just to start off, here's the quote from Elder Theodorus of Crete, and this was relayed to us by Metropolitan Neophytos of Morphu. The quote is, "Dear children, on a Mediterranean Friday morning, Greece time, you'll be drinking your coffee when you hear that the Jews have struck Persia's nuclear program." I believe that quote was made or relayed in 2019. And of course, we had the strike called Rising Lion, I believe, by Israel on Iran's nuclear program on a Friday. I have my personal story of it is I woke up on a Saturday morning here in Australia and sat down and had my coffee and turned my computer on and read the news and almost did a spit take. So things are happening, and we've detailed this with Conrad on Then and Now with Jim Jatras twice now. But I thought it would be good to revise it as we're now moving into, let's say, the end of, the beginning of the end. There's been many beginnings of the ends, but certainly into a different part of the theater with Ukraine, Russia, and Iran, Israel is still a boiling pot, and of course we have other movements in the world. So it's I think behooves us to have this conversation. And thank you, gentlemen, for joining. Just really briefly for all those watching, please like and subscribe and share and support the show. Let the people know where we're at, and of course, send us your super chats. So if you have any questions or comments that you want to be read out, send it as a super chat on YouTube, and I'll read it out. Or send it over on Streamlabs or over on PayPal and goes right into my pocket, which is very much appreciated and keeps the light on and lets us do more and more wonderful things. So I thank you for all the support. Gentlemen, Conrad, I'll start with you.
No, it's a big question. I think you said 2019. I believe it was given even in 2016, if I remember properly. It was
Elder Theodorus proposed in 2016.
Yeah, he gave it not too long, I think, before he reposed. So mid 2010s or something. This is when something like this would have been given. But real quick, Jason, should I do my quick intro or should I address the prophecy? Which ones would we do right now?
You can do whatever you like, sir. It's your show now.
So, I've been on Jason's show a few times, so it's an honor to be here. This time on time, unlike my previous appearance. So no tardiness this time. And
prayers work, folks. Prayers work. See?
For anyone that doesn't know what I'm all about, I have a show called World War Now. You can find us on Substack, worldwarnow.co. I'm trying to get back into my live stream situation. I usually do a Tuesday evening live stream as well. But because I've been in Russia for, 7 of the past 9-10 weeks, it's been I've been outside of good Wi-Fi zones for a while, not able to stream on the same time that I normally would. So, I've got a lot of big reports coming out. I've been to the Donbass twice recently in a journalistic capacity, and I'm still slowly but surely releasing the edited content from that. I've already released my shows with the Alexander Nevsky Volunteer Brigade at the front line, my interview with Gabriel Doroshin, the 8th great-grandson of Tsar Nicholas I. Up next, I've got my interview with Metropolitan Mitrofan of Gorlovka, one of the most long-suffering bishops in towns in Donetsk that only fairly recently has been fully kind of secured from it. It still gets shelled all the time. So that's sort of what I've been doing. I've been going to interesting Orthodox places. Specifically recently Russia, Ukraine, in the Donbass, in Crimea. I was at the New Chersonese center, sort of archaeological cathedral center that the Russian Orthodox Church has built in southern Crimea, commemorating the baptism of Saint Vladimir, the Eastern Roman Empire's time in Crimea. So very relevant actually to the prophecies that we're talking about when it comes to Russia and Turkey and World War III and all those sorts of things. And this is the subject that I talk about. I gave a speech The reason I was in Donbass this past time was I gave a speech at Mariupol State University at a conference there, and the speech was exactly about this. I specifically was, because there's some relevant Russian people in government and society there, so I did my best to relay the dangers of, getting too close with Turkey, what's going to potentially happen from the, prophetic perspective, obviously aligning the prophetic perspective with the strategic reality. So it was, doing my best to spread the word about what we're actually going to be talking about on the show right now. So, this right here is, my job, for lack of a better word. So, as far as the prophecy, but from Elder Theodore goes, I mean, obviously for those prophecies and more, you have to grab Jonathan's books, the Eschaton Vigil, because that's, again, the only reason I don't have one right now is because I've given all of the ones I have away to people that want them, because it's such a resource. And those books and other other resources people have published online over the past few years of picking up on this stuff. That's how I keep track of everything. And the prophecy of Elder Theodore, that fateful Friday morning, it happened the way it did. And the next thing we're watching is, of course, at least regarding that prophecy, is the fate of Erdogan in Turkey and everything there. And I know Jonathan was on the same page as me before we went live on the show. What I think is going to be the next shoe to drop is all this nonsense with the ecumenical patriarch and the Pope. And I know at some point on the stream we're going to get into all the Joe Wilson stuff and the fact that we're all Russian agents now in the eyes of the deep state. But this recent letter from Pope Leo about the 1700th anniversary Council of Nicaea. What was the new thing that he's writing called? It's going to be Unitate Fidei. Unitate Fidei is his new letter, Unity of the Faith. The Council of Nicaea, they've a big article about it on the Union of Orthodox Journalists, which people can read. And I think that, again, if you heard what people on Mount Athos have been saying, the people that are the closest with the sources of many of these prophecies and these elders, Saint Paisios, Saint Porphyrios, Elder Ephrem, they're talking about how at the end of the day, the next thing that's probably going to go down is some kind of attempt at false union or a false union between the ecumenical patriarchate and the Pope. And again, I pray that this doesn't happen, but many people for a while have been saying that that's going to be the next shoe to drop in this sort of escalating ladder regarding the prophecies and regarding, the confluence of world events and church affairs.
Yeah, it's a lot to cover. And a lot to get in your head. I mean, that's the reason why we started with that quote, is because if people start doubting whether or not these prophecies are just sort of wishful thinking, when you read a lot of from, obviously quite a few of these are made by monks from Crete or Mount Athos, and a lot of them are centered around Greece and Constantinople and all the rest of it. So, from a casual viewer, you could maybe start thinking, well, this is just Greek Orthodox wishful thinking. But when these prophecies continue to come true, as many of them came true about COVID and the lockdowns and all the rest of it, that were made in some cases decades before the event, then you have to give it pause and at least put it into your favorite narrative surrounding geopolitics today. So when we're starting to examine, let's say, this peace plan that's being proposed and all the rest of it, it's like, look, we kind of know where things kind of want to go. Now, whether they go that way or how they conclude, that's up in the air a little bit. There's a lot of different ways we can actually affect things through prayer and vigilance and diligence. But I think some things are going to happen. They want to happen, and in some cases, I think they have to happen. There are other prophecies made by Metropolitan Nephotos, who was talking. I can pull up the quotes. It was actually from Father Peter Heers, did a great show about this, talking about some other prophecies saying that there will be war, and there has to be a war in order for humanity to even have a chance of setting things right. And it's not going to be just like little skirmish wars. It's going to be major confrontations. So that's coming, and I don't think we can stop it, but we can prepare for it. And I know, Jonathan, a lot of your work over at Eschaton Vigil is all about that. So maybe you can speak a little bit about preparations and any commentary you want to add on with Conrad. And please introduce yourself to the audience.
Sure. I'm Jonathan. I publish the books behind Eschaton Vigil, some of which we've discussed and have been on other streams. Patrick at Church of the Eternal Logos has done a bunch of streams on the different content of the books. Like you were mentioning, the war has to take place. It's kind of like, well, first off, anything to do with eschatology and and prophecies. This has nothing to do with anyone's salvation. This is not something that anyone needs to uh, look at in terms of their faith. And then it's also not meant to be something that's scary for a lot of people. I think it can be. I think they can kind of look at all of this, and it can be frightening. And it's also reminiscent of some of the Protestant attitudes toward like the Left Behind series and other things that have taken place. So that's kind of this space that we don't want to be in. And again, this is about repentance and about understanding the times that we live in, understanding that this is you can look at all of this along a longer timeline. We look at the Old Testament, there were prophets that prophesied Christ coming. We still have prophets. We still have, our tree is judged by our fruit. We still have prophets today who give us an idea of what's coming in the future as a warning and a preparation, and for us to be aware of our own repentance and what we should be focusing on. So always want to make that clear that this is not something necessarily for everyone, and totally unnecessary for anyone to investigate for their salvation. But for those that are interested, and I believe it can be very timely, especially right now with the access to the information that we have. In 2024, when I started Eschaton Vigil, the idea was to translate things and make them available, make the works and the words of the elders and the saints of the church available to the English speaking audience, because this is totally foreign to us. You know, as an American, this is something that doesn't have, you know, this is reaching throughout time. And we don't have that concept because we're kind of in the microwave, immediacy kind of world. And so we can't understand the timelines and this how all of that ties together. But a lot of what's available, if you look at it for the last 2,000 years since Christ, there are plenty of they all corroborate each other. You know, and that's one of those kind of tests for this. And there's a lot of discussion about that in some of the Russian literature about, well, what is a prophet, and how does this count? Is this something that could be relied upon? And I've done my best to try to provide as much of that as possible, and hopefully people can look at it and see. You were mentioning the war, and there has to be a war. This is something that came up that was a real turning point for me to understand, especially as a proud American who always looked at Russia bad and all of these the standard ideas only a half decade ago. Now I understand, and everyone's on a different path and timeline where they can understand this in their journey through Orthodoxy. But once you understand that Russia had the third Rome, that becomes something that you can really start piecing together that, okay, the history that I know about the Western world isn't necessarily the most accurate. And then you get into, okay, well, who did these things? Who's behind some of this? And that's where Russia Before the Second Coming explains that when Tsar Nicholas II was killed, there was a punishment that was required. This was the slaughtering of one of God's appointed kings, and that led to a slaughtering of so many people. And the same thing takes place in the future. There's a massive war coming, and no one is prepared for what we'll face.
Conrad, any comments?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, and I think it's important. It's great how Jonathan ended it with the aspect of Russia as the third Rome, and it's just crazy because I was there in Crimea at New Chersonesus, the site of the baptism of Saint Vladimir, where he also married Princess Anna of the Byzantine Eastern Roman imperial family. In the future, in the in the 15th century after 1453. Ivan the Third marries Sophia Palaiologos. Their grandson is Ivan Grozny, Ivan the Terrible, and that really is the beginning of what we understand as the Russian Empire that existed up until 1918. The baton almost perfectly passed. They start running with the baton in the 10th, 11th centuries. They really grab it, Ivan the Third, and then it's fully handed off with Ivan Grozny. And understanding that, obviously, you mentioned, Jason, the classic question. People, I've heard many mockers, many people that make fun of this stuff, many people that think it's silly, many, for lack of a better word, devout Orthodox people that just really think differently than us about these sorts of things, and God bless them. But I think you've heard, this is just Greek nationalist bluster. It's like, oh, you believe that the Turks are going to get destroyed and your favorite Byzantine era emperor is going to come back. It's like, that just sounds like fan fiction, bro. But like, if that was true, why would if it was all just Greek nationalist bluster, I highly doubt St. Paisios would have said that the Russians are going to have to be the ones to, defeat the Turks. If it was just some fanciful idea, the Greeks would storm in there with their planes and just destroy them with their, single-handedly, despite being, 1/10 the population of Turkey. But that's not how these things go. There's a whole aspect with Russia, and it has to do with all sorts of geopolitical interests. There's even somewhat I don't want to say divergent prophecies, but different sort of contingencies. St. Paisios talks about how the Russians won't do it for any kind of real filial feeling towards the Greeks, whereas Eldris Galactia, who reposed in 2021, one of the holiest elders of recent times, she says that it will be sort of motivated by a sort of mutual Orthodox feeling between Russians and Greeks, which, again, I think that sort of depends on if Russia really repents, like Jonathan said, really needs to happen due to the martyrdom of Tsar Nicholas II, which, again, I think for people that don't know the context, we're kind of just jumping right in with all of these ideas. But, again, with the martyrdom of Tsar Nicholas in 1918, the world was sort of thrown into 100 years of, you can call it what it really is, which is the Jewish century, because it was a ritual murder by specific groups of people. But, it threw us into this, I call it like an alchemical transmutation of the world mind. Like, society was thrown off kilter at a fundamental level, which fundamentally, even if we are still hundreds, thousands of years away from, the times of the Antichrist and the times of the end times, the killing of the last Christian emperor that had, Constantinian lineage was undoubtedly a cosmic event that, we entered a whole new era farther along the timeline that we know is coming. Look, Jesus is coming back. Every Christian believes in that. So every day you're one day closer to the end of the world. And the martyrdom of Tsar Nicholas, that was a big node on the timeline.
It's interesting that you put it there, because I've been investigating. Part of my work is talking about calling the incoming spirit of the age, this age of the vengeful son. And the way I look at it is looking through these sort of archetypes, right? So saying that at the beginning of the 20th century, up until 1950 or so, you had the age of the tyrannical father. Sort of that depiction of Kronos eating his children, kind of ideal, which is an inversion of the wise or the good father. Then you have the age of the devouring mother, which is the inversion of the blessed mother. Now you have the inversion of the vengeful son, which is the inversion of the prodigal son. And you see these inversions, and I kept trying to figure out what happened when. Like, there seemed to be this flipping of things, and I blamed a lot on sort of liberalism and the British quite a bit, right? Because I kind of coalesce around that narrative. But even if you look at, let's say, classic British liberalism from 400 years ago up until about mid-19th century, yeah, it's Luciferian. It's got its problems. I'm not defending it at all, but it's not what we have now. Like, you couldn't even say that in 1854 that there's a clear line from that to what we have now in 2025. Like, something's gone awry. So I think that you're right, is that the assassination of Tsar Nicholas suddenly becomes this true inversion event where Christendom now is, let's say the ethics and the virtues of Western civilization goes, and we're now on this pathway to like pure revolution between all these categories, right? To destroy the categories of man, woman, and child, the sort of the family trinity.
It does. As you mentioned, the devouring mother. That is it speaks to the suicidal empathy that we are dealing with along the politics, especially regarding immigration and some of the things that have been established that kind of it bleeds the system. And I think when we were talking, I don't know where you place that the angry son, but or vengeful or wrathful son.
Vengeful son, yeah.
But that actually would play very well into the technocracy that takes over with some form of transhumanism, AI, and whatnot as a this new creation, or whatever you want to call it. That's a interesting take I haven't heard yet.
Well, I think it's some of the conversations I've had over the last 2 years concerning this. My friend Charles Badil said something along the lines of the coming age is going to be a Gen X head on a Gen Z body, and it's just having this pure. Like, one thing I'll say about my own generation, which is Gen X, is there's a lot of resentment baked in, right? It's like this sort of nihilistic, iconoclastic resentment of like it's all fake and gay, and it's destroy the system, and we're outcasts, we're happy on the outside, right? And then suddenly now you have prominent members of that generation getting power positions, but they're still on the outside. Peter Thiel, Elon Musk, all these other guys who are bringing that influence now into the establishment. And I feel that there's a palpable energy of let's just burn this thing down. Like, we're going to break it because it doesn't serve our interests, and we're going to remake it into something that does. The only problem is that we don't have the moral or social breaks in the system to tell us when to stop. So people will I've said that the problem with the vengeful son is it's going to feel good because at first it's going to feel like justice. A lot of the bad people are going to have bad things done to them, and we're going to go, yay, good.
You're losing the boomer grifters and gaining those idealists that aren't doing it for the money. They've got all the money in the world. Now they're just doing it for pure destruction.
Well, and there's even prophecies in Metropolitan Neophytos. He told me even some of this in person. I heard some of this in other videos that he's made. People have seen the viral videos from a decade ago of him talking about the Great Replacement, him talking about the Kalergi plan, all this kind of stuff. I mean, just recently, just this past week, Archbishop Sabas of Zelenograd, who I had a whole meeting with a month ago, he openly is basically discussing the Great Replacement and opposing Russian immigration policy that has to do with it. So this is something the church talks about. But Metropolitan Neophytos, I think St. Porphyrios and others talked about how the backlash against the terrorists and the Muslims and the Africans, specifically in Europe, is going to be so strong that it's going to be cause a whole host of other problems. And this has been prophesied, and again, these prophecies are largely given sort of emotionlessly, in a sense, very, very detached from any kind of political attachment. They're not given as if it's like, oh, then these racists are going to do this, that, or the other. It's like it's acknowledging the immigration problem, but then it's saying the backlash is going to cause even greater problems. And it's not as if it's saying that like if the people just open their hearts, this won't happen. This is one of those things where it's like, no, this is just going to happen, man. Like, I'm sorry, like it's just kind of how things go, and that's the real fear when it comes to camp of the saints type situations. But you talk about getting thrown into this, the chaos door being thrown open with the assassination of Tsar Nicholas. And this is my Twitter bio for, years now. It's been, there is no emperor, which is a quote from That Hideous Strength by C.S. Lewis, which is the third book in the Space Trilogy, if anyone hasn't read that. And what happens in the story is it's, basically, this force of good, these people, the few people that really God has chosen for the time are trying to fight, like this technocratic, techno-zog, like it's literally like a brain in a jar controlling everything from like the UK or whatever. I haven't read the book in full in years, since college, but I read it a few times, and and then they bring back Merlin basically to like help them, from like the Arthurian legend times, and they bring him back, and he's asking them all these questions like, oh, we got to go to the Lord of Northumbria, and oh, we got to go to the king, we got to go to this, and finally he's like, all right, you've exhausted all the options, we have to go to the one whose job it is to settle disputes in Christendom, we have to go to the emperor. And then the main character who just brought Merlin back is like, there is no emperor, and then Merlin is like, what? Like it's just like over. He just like gets like totally black-pilled. He's just like, what's even happened? Like, what even happens? He just like, he totally gets deflated. And that's because for the history of Christendom, from a time when the world looked even anything akin to what you would recognize, a Christian society with Christian morality and Christian courts, and the empire which, mostly surrounded the world ocean, which was the Mediterranean. anything that looked like that, that leadership was finally snuffed out by the same people that killed Jesus in 1918, and it created, again, if you were someone like Merlin, or like, some kind of aristocrat from the middle of the 11th century somewhere, it'd be a devastating, you'd feel it in your soul when it happened. It would have been, I mean, even people in America, who Americans never liked Russia or the Tsar or the idea of empire or imperials and stuff. Like, even Americans, just as Christians, were offended and shocked by the fact that the Bolsheviks actually killed the whole royal family. It was something that even the most diehard liberals, liberal supporters among, the average civilian in the West, that they had no concept of actually really doing that. It was very taboo, like, even in the most liberal of times. So it really was a watershed moment.
Yeah, I mean, there's almost no justification for destroying authority. And I understand that sort of revolutionary spirit, especially that's very alive in America, that liberalism, right? That's caked in individualism, nominalism, materialism, which is now, I've just been watching a lot of the debates that Andrew Wilson and Jim Bob have just done on the modern day debates, and they seem circular. But I remember, I was a diehard atheist and was watching all those new atheist debates, and those did a lot of damage. They gained a lot of ground from those debates, because it's substantiating a worldview constantly, and it's not about converting people. Christ does that, but we can. I think what's interesting right now is that liberalism is up on trial in the public square, and people are beginning to reject it. And they don't even know what these terms are. They don't understand what nominalism is, but they're going, wait a minute.
Mm-hmm.
These arguments aren't convincing.
There's
Dinosaurs have feathers now, and what are you talking about, right? So.
There's a really big thing. I mentioned a buddy of mine who finished his D-Min. He works for a seminary in Central America and Central United States, America. He was mentioning that there's really only a few years left for the Protestant seminary track career thing. It just the pathway has it ended up in a gravel road, and there's just no structure. Everything's kind of falling apart, and that's obvious to a lot of people who watch any of the debates and things on YouTube that are available now, that you can't get to a the liberal Christianity that's taken place, the concerts and all the other stuff, the non-sacramentalism that took over. You can't get anywhere with that. You can't. The arguments don't stand up. The apologetics for orthodoxy have just it becomes so obvious that it's truth, and there is a blessing, and that brings about this massive flourishing that we're seeing. And I know every parish has dozens of catechumens and lots of visitors and things like that, and it's because of the failures of the previous generations in instilling any of these actual values, and where materialism and liberalism took over, they see destruction ahead, and they're grasping at something that's true, and a sacramental faith, a real faith that has direct lineage is probably a bad word, but a way to say this is real, accurate, and the Holy Spirit is here. That people are dying for that, and in America, where everything is fake and gay.
It's interesting. Sorry, just really briefly, Conrad. Because I'm just from my notes, like, you have toll houses, you have the Eschaton, you have World War premonitions, all these things. Now, it'd be easy to get blackpilled on this, but as Father Seraphim Rose says, if it's throughout the set the table. It's later than you think, much later. Hasten therefore to do the work of God. Right? It's not just about the world out there, that things are changing, and you got to speed this up because things are happening and the end times are nigh. It's that if I die in the next hour, have I set the table? Have I been living by faith?
Yeah.
Have I been bearing witness and testifying? Like, this is what I think is missing, is people, especially in the Protestant world, it's about living your faith. It's not about just going to mega church on Sunday and getting real riled up and doing the blessing and doing minimal work. It's like it's in everything you do. It has to be a phronema. It has to be a state of being. And if it isn't, then people will fall away easily when they're pushed and shoved. I just remember what happened to libertarians during COVID. They talked a good talk, and then as soon as tyranny was actually there, a lot of people rolled up. They do, whoa, whoa, whoa, whoa, whoa. Maybe lockdowns are so bad, whatever, right? So sorry, Conrad, I cut you off, but I just to tag on to it, I think that's part of this. People inquiring and coming to Orthodoxy is that when they're meeting people, and not just the online presentation, but I think when people meeting people in real life, it's like these people are living their faith, or at least doing as much as they can to try to, or trying to substantiate that faith in their life in every way. That's different, and that I think right now is very attractive.
No, I'm glad you said that, Jason, because, in defense of having a more eschatological mindset, I know we have to make sure that people don't think we're trying to, tell people that this is the most important thing they need to focus on. But in defense of, being aware of these things, if you have an eschatological mindset, you'll be both in theory prepared for the general end of things, but most importantly and most likely, your end of things. You have an eschatology too. It's called, your life, and you're gonna die. And like you said, you gotta ascend through some particular judgment and in the toll houses, and your soul will be separated from your body, and that's a horrible, horrible thing. That's not how things were supposed to happen, but that's how things happen until that trumpet rings. And I think the understanding of that, and understanding how, for example, if you're a type of person that is preparing for, maybe you are convinced that everything that we've talked about in the prophecies is happening in the next week. If you were truly, sincerely preparing for that in body and soul, sure, maybe you'd have bought a few too many guns and dried food, but you would probably, in theory, also be taking your repentance and your confession and your receiving of the Eucharist also just as seriously. So you'd probably be in a better place than if you were just actually thinking everything's hunky-dory and that society is, actually getting better. But I think you talk about how so many of these people are coming after orthodoxy, but we're talking about how God is going to, how there has to be this war. And there's a few different angles I wanted to talk about that from, but again, St. Paisios is a name everyone hears a lot on these streams about prophecies, and everyone knows the St. Paisios quote that people like to say, America, go be a monk in America. One day America will be holy. And people got to remember that was before pretty much any of the monasteries of Elder Ephraim, existed in America. And now we have 19 incredible monasteries, and these monasteries, and the person that created them, Elder Ephraim, is one of the main progenitors of these very prophecies and ideas, and what we understand now about St. John of Atatsis, who's in the icon right behind Jonathan's head. Like, that's from the guy who, in many ways, you sort of have to understand Elder Ephraim as a bit of an eschatological prophet at a certain level to America, because he came to America and he brought the true fullness of, Athonite, Greek Orthodoxy to the United States. And St. Joseph the Hesychast, who was the one that brought the Jesus prayer back on Mount Athos and really back into hesychasm, back into the mainstream of Orthodoxy. This is like the real deal. Metropolitan Neophytos told me that Elder Ephraim was the greatest saint to live in the 20th century, and there's a lot of great saints of the 20th century. So if that's true, then that's something we need to, someone we need to really take seriously. And again, the fact that right now I'm in my grandmother's closet, but normally I'm in Central Texas, and an hour from my house there's a monastery that Elder Ephraim set up. And the fact that I became Orthodox, and Seraphim Rose is one that really got me into it. And then only after I was received into the church, I realized, wait a second, this is a monastery started by a saint, and I started going there, and it was and it's just incredible that we have these these opportunities, and we have this connection to this this true vine of faith like that. But as far as the prophecies in the war go, I do think that whether it's the mass conversion to Orthodoxy, or the sort of great noticing when it comes to Zionism and the issue of Jewish control over the United States, with that happening, these prophecies and how the war is going to happen, it's going to have happened from all sorts of different, multiple different individual actors or group actors that are moving towards a direction. They're going to sort of achieve it at once, and that will be that sort of prophetic reality. And you have Israel, simultaneously racing to try to beat the 80-year curse, what they perceive as the impending end of their state. Netanyahu thinks that it's his political role as the current leader of Israel. Like, after him, it's not going to be possible to secure the realm, to maintain the Jewish state in the Middle East over a longer period of time, become the regional hegemon, largely because they see the tides turning in the United States, with everybody realizing what's really going on. Israel has never been less popular. Zionism is not popular. People are casually aware of the control that Jewish forces and the World Jewish Congress, everybody's these groups used to operate as it was just a little headline. Oh, the World Jewish Congress met today. Now everybody's wanting clips and citing everything that they've said. This is not how they like to operate. So on that front, they're moving towards this World War III, towards this war with Iran, towards confrontations in the Middle East, confrontations between NATO and Russia. And then on the other hand of things, we have the Ecumenical Patriarch about to unite with the Pope, major church persecutions going on in Ukraine, digital ID being passed all sorts over America and all these states. There's thankfully, because St. Paisios warned so strongly against digital ID, there's all these protests in Greece and millions of people aren't going to get it. So, good to the Greeks for that. But that's part of why God is going to allow all this to happen, because it will stop some of this, tyrannical antichrist control mechanisms from really happening. So on the one hand, you have the world controllers and the Zionists pushing us to World War III because they know they've got a limited threshold with which they control the most powerful military force to ever exist, the United States. And then you've got God, basically allowing something like that to blow up beyond, their ability to control it, because, the forces of Antichrist and the forces of evil are about to catch us, with our pants down, unfortunately, as far as this sort of tyrannical technocratic control system goes.
And in the middle of all of that, you have, of course, what's going on in Russia and New Khazaria, and then you have your Turkey fighting with Israel over Cyprus and other pieces in the Med. They established that EEZ with Libya, and now that's a huge battle with Greece, and we're setting all these pieces in motion. So just like the faith is a both and, the same thing happens with all of the political elements. So a lot of people see this, especially from the American mind, they see it as this this two sides. Oh well, this is doing this or this. No, there's 100 different elements being moved all at the same time, and there is either one direction with Christ, and then there's all the other ones fighting for their different, vying for control over this or that, and being used as pawns, and just like the Kalergi plan and some of the other things that are being forced into Western world. We're watching that, we're seeing all of the news, but too many people aren't tying this together. Everything has a spiritual effect. There is a spiritual element to every single thing that takes place in your life, in the news, and all of these different things. Everything from the slaughter of people in Gaza, to the slaughters of the past centuries. All of these have spiritual effect, and that will continue to accelerate. Right, like you said, they're trying to push as hard and fast as they can while they still have some element of control. And I think for America, not many people have a very positive outlook. We have a lot of serious issues that are threatening to pull the thread. And for some people, I think they really thought that the Kirk shooting would have an even more massive effect. But I think there'll be more political violence, and that political violence will continue to pull at all of these threads until really there's not much left of the fabric. And that's kind of where America finds itself. And then we have, of course, everything else taking place overseas. And it just seems like the level of chaos, for a while I thought maybe it's just the access to the information that allows us to look at all of this. But no, truly, the amount of chaos has increased to the point where it's almost impossible. And that's also a part of the discussion in the prophecies, where it shows that time has an accelerationist element during these periods. And we have a lot going on here in our own backyard. And that always makes, I always think of the monasteries that Elder Ephraim established, and I always think of all the parishes and the parishes that have a ton of people here. And we just went through COVID, and we're searching for toilet paper, but have we prepared and kept enough flour and enough oil to be able to maintain the Eucharist? There's all these different things that we should probably consider having a closet full of, just in case there's some more chaos either on one coast or the other, or if certain um, things get shut down. That's one thing that America, because we have so many jurisdictions, and it's a little bit untenable. We don't have a central authority where you kind of would say, okay, hey, do we have a storehouse that has enough of this or that for the faithful? And that's something that I think in the future, the more faithful we have here, will be considerate of those things, and for a war or otherwise.
Yeah, it's a very good point. I mean, this is why I've been trying to preach out to people as much as possible, is that we can analyze the politics, and we can pull apart the narratives, and it makes good content and all the rest of it. And these things are good things fruitful things to think about sometimes, right? But if you're looking for solutions, the solutions is in your community. And the solution and the fixing these things or fixing your country is not going to come through politics or material means. That age is done. We're even in the analysis of data is immaterial. It's might as well. It's just thoughts. It's just
It
recorded
doesn't provide a
thoughts on the
solution.
screen.
There is no
Right.
solution in it. Yeah.
You can't materialize these things. They're immaterial by nature. So the only thing we can do is then move to a spiritual solution. I just want to read really briefly. This is from some screenshots I made of when Father Peter Heers was talking about the three great sins that will lead to World War III. And these are quotes from Metropolitan Neophytos. Metropolitan Neophytos explains that he was a student when he heard this from Saint Jacob. This is talking about World War III. And asked him why St. John asserted this. St. Jacob said, because the Lord revealed to him it's because the next generation won't give birth to normal, ordinary children, but to demonic children. And he didn't name any other reasons. Metropolitan Neophytos emphasizes, and the saints whom I mentioned a little earlier all say the same thing, that the coming generations, if the Lord doesn't intervene, won't be in the image and likeness of God. They will be in the form of a man, but in essence with a dead soul. Such a person can't become a saint. If a society and humanity can't give birth to saints, then there is no point in living. And there are three great sins that have led to the present situation in the world, as Eminence continues. The spiritual cause of the war, not only in Ukraine, but in the entire system in which we now live. After all, it's not just about components of the new man of future generations, artificial intelligence, nanotechnologies, microchips, and all that. But we should also talk about our own sins, especially about three of them. The first sin, which has swallowed up the entire world, is abortion, and not just because it exists, but also because it's legalized by states, even Orthodox states. When sin becomes a law and a right, then the Lord turns away from man because he no longer has a desire to repent. The second sin that of Arizona and excuse me if I mispronounce this, Girontisa Galactia spoke about the perversions of fornications that occur in and out of marriage. Nowadays, not only same-sex marriage is being spread everywhere, but also pedophilia, pedophiles, trans ideology, Neophytos says. The third sin is witchcraft, Satanism, astrology, and parapsychology. Modern people prefer the energies of sorcerers, Satanists, and Masons. All these people prefer the devil to Christ. And just one last one. The fourth reason, in Metropolitan Neophytos' opinion, is that the leaders of today's churches all over the world aren't talking about or teaching these things. When the pastor doesn't lead his flock, his people, his faithful correctly, first the saints disappear, and then Christ himself.
Mm-hmm.
So, just with those three or four sins, these are things we can address, and we don't need to ask permission to address them. And what we said in the last episode with Neil, John Heers, and made by Jim Bob is turning towards unapologetic Christianity. And I think that seems to be the movement now, where it's not just proclaiming your faith and living your faith, but not apologizing or backing down, not one step back, as Andrew Wilson likes to say. That it needs to be what I call full spectrum dominance of orthodoxy, because it is later than we think. And if there is a chance of let's say, maybe not saving ourselves or saving this time that we live in, but setting the seeds for future generations to inherit a better world, or to have the tools to make a better world out of it, then this is the time to do it. This is our calling. That we need to start to address these sins directly and make no apologies for it.
Mm-hmm.
No, I totally agree, and I call it, that same thing. I would call it orthomaxing. That's what I'd called it in my speech that I gave to the parish of St. John Chrysostom in Michigan. I have the first 25 minutes of it recorded. I should probably post it. Father James has asked me to post it, but the speech was about, look, like there was a time, and I'm not saying every time in the past was just perfect, but there was a time in, society where, you go back in time and you forget that you're in like an Orthodox Christian time, and you pull out the cheese on a Wednesday, everyone would be like, what are you doing, man? Like, like all sorts of other things. Obviously, if anybody suggested any of this outlandish nonsense today, everybody around you would be like, we are Christians, bro. Like, where did you forget that? Did you forget that we're, here in we're here, the kingdom of Christ is at hand. We're sort of all involved with that. And again, the only thing that's going to bring that back is people that believe that same stuff actually doing that, like actually saying it. That doesn't mean that you like run around wagging the finger in somebody's face, but you gotta actually, stand on business, for lack of a better expression. And I think and that means like taking everything like the fast and the church calendar seriously. And I think, like you mentioned, about being prepared. And I think Jonathan and other people have it covered. I don't need to get on the stream and tell everyone to buy more gold and guns and this, that, and the other. I have a personal interest in permaculture and getting those things interested. But I leave that to other experts and refer to their content. But one piece of advice I'd give to everybody that people need to think of, and don't, before anyone clips this out of context, I'm not telling you, the person watching this, to have anything to leave your priest or to leave your parish. I'm just saying, you know who you are, your spiritual needs, what you would like to happen if things, were to really collapse. We all remember what happened with COVID. What, if you were involved in a parish that went along with things, you probably felt a certain way. And if you had a parish that didn't, you probably felt a little bit better. Let's put it that way. And think about those things and make sure that you have a spiritual father, a priest in your area, a priest in your vicinity, a priest in your life that will allow you to still get the spiritual nourishment that you will need in the midst of these tough times. And again, I'm not giving any specific advice to anyone in their given situation. I think everyone knows what that means when it comes to what they need spiritually. But just think about it. You want to make sure that there's going to be a priest that is still going to be dedicated enough to bring you the sacraments, to be, hosting liturgies in the midst of very difficult, economic, physical circumstances.
It is time now to not consider yourself PC, right? You want to orthomax on all of your own activities, prayer as much as possible, and liturgy as much as possible. And for a lot of people, it's difficult because America doesn't have a Orthodox parish on every corner. So a lot of people, it's an hour or something away, and that obviously makes a big difference. But there is a there's been such a growth in it, and there's so much content available online, and there's plenty of books that are available in English, and all of this is happening at such a rapid pace. It's kind of like I look at this from the geopolitical element during the Biden administration, having an absent president and it being run in Lord of the Flies way. You had these extreme things taking place left and right, and it accelerated all of this kind of detriment. And now, whether it's any form of pause on any of that, it continues. It's just hidden, and so the timeline continues on. And so you have to prepare yourself as best you can to make, understand as much as you can about the faith, and have a spiritual father who isn't PC about the topics of the church that are very, unmodern. That's something that there's a lot of splits and things taking place. Obviously, we mentioned about the EP and all of what's taking place with some of the different churches, and those are canonical things that are way above my pay grade. But the discussion can still be made for being around those who have the spirituality that you're going to require during a difficult time.
Well, here's an easy prediction to make, right? Because we're already starting to see this now in America. Was it Senator Joe Hill, I believe his name was, or Senator Joe something?
Wilson?
Congressman Senator Joe Wilson. Yeah, Congressman.
Yeah. Was made the proclaimment, of course, that Russian Orthodox, ROKOR, even even the Serbians got named for some reason,
Mhm.
are all part of this spy network for Putin, right? We saw this play out with the canonical church in Ukraine, and of course, what's going on there. Churches are being defiled, broken into, priests are being
Mhm.
abused. We'll put it that way, on multiple levels, and uh, I believe that that's just a staging ground now, because as Ukraine is going to be obviously losing this war, and they've lost this war a long time ago, but now it's full liquidation, and the rats are getting nervous and they're starting to scurry. So as this becomes much more obvious that Ukraine is lost, and I think we're going to see Russian boots in Kiev within the next year, then the narrative is going to be blame, right? Who's to blame? Well, certainly won't be the congressmen and the senators and the politicians, or the British MPs and all the rest of it who made this war possible, and it certainly won't be the people who made out failed peace plans or all that stuff. No, of course not. It's going to somehow fall on the Orthodox Church, right?
Mhm.
And for anyone listening to this, if you're Greek or if you're attending a Greek parish or that, and you think that they're just talking about those guys and not you, I got uh, bad news for you.
Mhm.
It's going to affect everyone in some way, shape, or form,
Well,
even if it just
eventually,
leads to some sort of schism. Yeah.
eventually, I think that all of the Orthodox churches will come under some type of scrutiny because of anti-Semitism. I think
Right.
that's something that's coming. You know, they will limit content on every platform specifically because of that, and I mean that's the game, right? They play a certain game, and that game always will be a part of their battle lines, and even the Russian portion, you know, that's another discussion which I don't think American Orthodoxy is up to the um, that's not a that's a 600 level class. That's not in the catechumenate to understand the process of history and things like that. And when that comes out, then it's like, oh whoa, hey, all of these people, they're going to be we're going to be targeted in one way or another because of that.
Well, yeah, I mean, look at the problems with joining organizations like the EU, becoming a liberal state. Because Romania, for example, they have all of these
Mhm.
hate crime councils that are integrated with their constitutional court and everything. And because these minority groups came together and Jews sued the Romanian Orthodox Church, if you go to Pascha service in Romania, and you go to Holy Thursday and Holy Friday, you're not going to hear a bunch of the hymns that you hear at the services that you and I go to, because they took out the part that talk about the Jews and the Jews killing Christ and all these. Sorry, someone's in my room. The talks about all this kind of stuff happening, and the sorry, I totally lost my train of thought. I'm still on it though.
You're saying that
I know
Romania had to remove the
yeah, they removed all these things, and look, they've talked about doing that in all sorts of places. Remember the U.S. Council of Catholic Bishops? They've got they took out what is it, perfidious Jew from the Catholic Easter Mass, and they have these anti-Semitism warnings from the councils of bishops in each Easter pamphlet in the church. I mean, that's horrible, and that's the kind of stuff that I think most Orthodox people would be scandalized if they saw that in the somewhere their church. But that's the kind of thing that future administrations, churches, institutions all over America are going to have to, they're probably going to be forced to do things like that. Because look, what was it? Ronald Lauder, billionaire at the World Congress, World Jewish Congress, he said, one of our goals is to pass anti-Semitism laws in all Western countries and on all of these things. And a lot of people talk about how the current loosening of free speech on a lot of things is actually going to be, it's sort of to let everyone expose themselves for being for being those people, and then once the technocratic digital ID stuff all really takes over, we'll have already identified all the necessary people that we need to shut up or euthanize or whatever it is that really needs to happen. And again, St. Paisios talks about that, how when the technology to really do the mark of the beast really becomes feasible at scale, that's part of why God is going to allow the third world war that we are awaiting right now to occur. And again, I always like to, again, I try to always not be biased. I try to think of what my bias is and then think of the most, the theory that would comport with the facts that I know that would go against it the most, and consider if that's something that's viable to be considered. And look, I think that ultimately, if I had to say what's going to happen regarding World War III, I think Israel is going to sort of facilitate not just the fall of Erdogan, but a full-on regime change in Turkey where
Yeah.
Ekrem İmamoğlu or somebody like him, for example, a real liberal, a much more liberal globalist-leaning Kemalist than even the Kemalists that were in power before him, like Kılıçdaroğlu, they're going to facilitate someone like him coming into power. They will then very rapidly take up the sort of Cold War line that Turkey used to have against Russia, because I mean Turkey is still the southern flank of NATO and the west against Russia. That's going to sort of be reinvigorated. The Erdogan playing both sides thing is going to stop. They might shut down a lot of the Russian pipelines that have been built through Turkey. That's going to be what happens. And so then ultimately, Israel and this new Turkey are going to be continuing to take over Syria, challenging Iran, moving up into the Caucasus with Azerbaijan and this stuff, and that will cause, that and the involvement, I think, even in the Black Sea will cause Russia to come down to Turkey. They make it all the way down to Mount Tabor. Israel probably ceases to exist as we know it today, internal political destruction, and then we have something akin to a Muslim, Christian, Jewish thing going on, and then, then we get John Vatatzis and then the Antichrist. I'm done speculating at that point. Unfortunately, that's what I think will happen. And at a certain level, that's what, if all this is going to happen, that would be a decent way for it to happen. There's a lot of, but then we got to think about the bad options. What's just as feasible at a certain level if things don't go exactly how I just said and how I think they're going to go? Well, Turkey is currently an enemy of Israel. Let's say a future administration keeps that up. Russia has made it explicit that they will not allow Iran, their major ally, who's provided them with extensive military capabilities that have allowed them to win the war in Ukraine. They say they will not allow Iran to destroy Israel. That's a red line for them. Russia will not allow that to happen. At least Putin and the current Russian government will not allow that to happen. So we have to consider a situation where, the Muslim world, Iran and these other Muslim countries get closer and closer and closer as Israel continues to operate and attempt to achieve hegemony in the region. And then you have, Iran, forces in Iraq, in Syria, and then Turkey themselves all descending on Israel. Russia then descends against them to sort of protect Israel from this reality. Russia, a lot of Chabad Lubavitch influence. Again, this is something that could easily happen that way. There's nothing in the prophecies to say that wouldn't be how it goes down. Obviously, I think it's a situation where you have to consider, maybe is it going to be more how St. Paisios said it, or is it going to be maybe how Eldris Galactia said it? And in the midst of all of this, of course, the reason why I think that is a little bit less likely is because if that was true, it'd be tough. Well, in many ways, actually, other way around. This is why that position is also likely, because if that was true, then Turkey would be willing to attack Greece, because Greece has been helping Israel throughout all of this. So the idea that that this would be sort of instigated and Russia gets involved and the rest of the world turns against Turkey because Turkey then invades Greece, that's a potential reality. On the flip side of things, Turkey gets flipped to being a more Kemalist liberal state. Eventually, they might, Greece might leave NATO because of how NATO-ist Turkey gets, and the beef still exists, and it becomes a whole other option. So the Greece, I think it makes sense that I think God gave us these saints with these prophetic gifts from Greece, because I think Greece is such a critical. It's going to be so critical on the geography of all of this, and when it comes to NATO and NATO's relationship with the Islamic world, Greece is sort of much like Constantinople was the barrier between Europe and Asia. Greece is it's sort of the nexus where a lot of these questions are going to be decided, because we're still sort of reckoning with we're still dealing with the consequences of the heretic, apostate, Protestant Roman Catholic West siding with the Ottoman Empire and the Turks and the enemies of Christendom against the Russian Empire, against Greece, against Christendom. Because if it wasn't for the United Kingdom and their alliance with the Ottoman Empire, Russia would have taken Constantinople in the 19th century. So, in many ways, geopolitically speaking, historically speaking, for just hobbyists, that's really what we're dealing with in a lot of ways.
We definitely have this is where you get into the whole timeline element. There are a million different ways that things can happen, but some of these things have been spoken about in more specific detail than others, and one of those, like about the digital ID in Greece, and saying, one of the elders saying that, well, you don't have to worry about taking it. Don't line up to take it, because before it really gets instituted, all the things will start to happen. The war will come before they can really enforce that. And as you see some of the pieces happening in America and elsewhere, that's a lot closer than we realize, and especially especially about some of the uh, notes about the Russian leader Vladimir, who will unleash a war with Israel, and some of the devastation that takes place in America. We have some real tragedy awaiting us for being the Babylon that we became, and the only way we became the Babylon is because we didn't have a king to defend us, and that opened the gate for this that cabal influence to take place, because there was no king to defend it. And that's one of those elements of the American mind is not wrapped around that. Even coming into Orthodoxy, we that Western mind is not ready to wrap its head around the lack of the the Americana that we all took so much pride in.
Let's deal with this little quote, because I think this is a natural tie-in as well. This is from Metropolitan Saba of the Antiochian Americans. The century of the Church of Immigrants is ended, and the century of evangelization has begun. Orthodoxy's mission is no longer primarily geographical, but existential. And I think that ties directly into this, is that we're seeing a spiritual war bleed out into the material. The division lines are obviously through the EO or the Eastern Orthodoxy and the rest of it. Now that we're starting to see His Eminence Bartholomew getting very cozy with the Pope, and now the big headlines this morning was that the Pope sent a nice little letter quoting the Nicene Creed without the Filioque. Oh my goodness! And people have gotten very excited, or energies have been rattled, let's say, about this whole thing. Yeah, when we're examining these potentialities, I think what oftentimes, what oftentimes gets missed, and especially when we're examining these like larger movements. Someone in the chat mentioned Jay Dyer. I've been reading the Changing Faces of Man book that he's been talking about. He started talking about this on Alex Jones and on his own show as well. And they're sort of a primer. They're sort of like, a post-Fabian primer for the new elites. And most of what you've read for, the WEF and Davos and the, they would eat the bugs and be happy, or nothing and be happy. All that stuff is all downstream from this text that they all seem to be reading from, this little culty thing, right? I think from my analysis, it's always the same. It always comes down to the same human thing, though. These guys might be full of demons, but they're essentially still human and still privy to the same failabilities as humans are, which is none of these guys trust each other, and they don't get along with each other very well. So there's always, you're seeing all these little tiny infights, which theoretically they have all this technology. They could institute all this right now and bugger us all, but they can't, because they're playing this dumb game. Where they're all jockeying for who's going to be in control and where the loopholes are going to be and who's getting the assurances, all the rest of it. And in the meantime, God's filling the gaps, and now this sort of insurgency is happening, that people are becoming more aware that this material war is really a spiritual war. And as that becomes more and more obvious, I think it'll be easier for people to choose the right side and to abandon, let's say, Babylon, and start to embrace Athens, to put a bow on that.
I think we got to. Okay, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say we got to be careful with everything, because as it becomes easier, at least as we perceive that it's becoming easier for people to discern the truth, the devil is gonna he's gonna triple down just as hard to make things confusing. And this is not to just bring this in out of left field, but we also have to consider the whole alien disclosure thing has continued to move along the track slowly but surely. Most people are very aware of all the theories at this point. You even see, at this point, everyone who watches Tucker, everyone that even watches Tucker Carlson knows about, demons and aliens and Seraphim Rose and this kind of stuff. So we have to be aware that, whatever disclosure happens, we all know that the main reason we've been warned about it by Father Seraphim Rose and others is because it obviously is it's a narrative breaking event for a lot of people. And if you have a weak sort of, I think, low Protestant faith, the alien thing could easily just one shot you, as they say. It could just be like, oh, well, clearly the Earth is in the center of the universe. This idea that there's a totalizing narrative about all sentient life that comes from the Bible and comes from God and is centered around the creation and humanity on Earth. Well, that's gone now because now I know about these aliens or whatever. So we have to be aware of, again, it's probably not going to be that obvious, but some kind of revelation, and it could be something where some
just
form
look
of
at
religion.
COVID.
Yeah,
Just look at COVID. I mean, that was obvious, or should have been obvious to everyone, and unfortunately, it wasn't. And it was even discussed and talked about for decades prior, and by the elders. And when I was reading some of these texts and translating them, putting them into English, I'm thinking, man, I wish people had been able to read this in English prior to this taking place, because and even then I was still shocked by the response, even from the church and everything else. And you had your holdouts, and then that's kind of, I can only see the future being that way, because we have you'll have an acceptance for things, just like the Uniate movements and everything else on one side, focused on the EP and some of the other. Some of the higher discussions with the how the faith is going to be responded to, and then of course get into the aliens, but like, we already had a test, and a lot of people failed.
And I think a lot of things that's, again, as it becomes clear that even, it sort of goes beyond Orthodoxy, people are returning to more traditional forms of Christianity in other places. At some point, the devil is going to try to corrupt that. You saw some of it you see some of the weird General Flynn stuff, and some of this weird Q stuff was getting weirdly Gnostic and culty. We got to be very aware that, what if something emerges that maybe almost looks a little bit like Orthodoxy, but it's actually, something Luciferian.
Yeah.
It's something that, harnesses that, like y'all were talking about, maybe the vengeful son sort of energy. It, distorts the gospel just enough, but it's still just that appeal that people are still looking for the truth, that it's able to capture a lot of that stuff. So we all need to be vigilant and aware of all of those sorts of things. And again, I think that's an important part about finding a spiritual father, because again, there's a lot of faithful people in the ecumenical patriarchate. There's a lot of simple people that don't have time to watch live streams like this or read theological treatises, that are just doing their thing. And God bless them. They're probably more spiritually advanced than me in many ways. But we have to recognize that, let's say this stuff happens, like you were just mentioning, without the Pope publishing these things, without the filioque, all of this kind of ecumenism stuff, we got to recognize that the Catholic Church is, in their mind, they're basically already in a form of communion with us. If you an Orthodox man, go to your local Catholic church and you tell the priest what you are, they will let you take communion. Like, it's all okay. Like, they believe we have all 7 sacraments. They believe that, notice the Catholic Church isn't really doing that much. They have some bishops and exarchs. They're not really sending a bunch of bishops to Greece. They don't really send a whole lot of bishops to Russia. They, in their own sort of way, they kind of respect certain Orthodox territory. The Romanian Church certainly hasn't stopped sending people to Romania, so it's not super reciprocal. We got to recognize all it is the EP just accepts that outstretched hand in some moderate way. It might not be like a full-on, signing of a big meeting and everyone meets. It might just be, they just celebrate a little liturgy together, and a bunch of Catholics and a bunch of Orthodox all kind of take communion, and then, maybe it's not even there's that much fanfare about it. But next thing you know,
the Poles are going to be so upset. The Poles are going to be so upset. It would almost be worth it, Conrad. It'll almost be worth it to hear the Polish outcry from here. You'll just be like,
well, just think about the Uniates and everything. I mean, the filioque thing has sort of already been given. You go to these Uniate churches, they don't say the filioque, so the Catholics have already, the stage has been set for all of this stuff. Again, Ukraine, I've always said that Ukraine is a dangerous situation as far as this goes, because the Ukrainian Greek Catholics, they want power. They're very, these are the worst people in my opinion as far as like people in Ukraine goes. And, that's the cool thing about going to Donbass, Catholicism is technically illegal in the SMO zone in the Donbass, because Ukrainian Greek Catholicism is not allowed. Like, if you set up a Uniate church there, and there's no like Roman Catholic, there's no Latins there, so no one's setting up, Novus Ordo or a Latin Mass. If you try to set up something in a Ukrainian Greek Catholic Uniate church, that is not allowed. So I went to the Ortho state.
Well, talk to us a bit more about it, because you just came back from Donbass and you were on the ground. What's the mood there in terms of the overall war mood, because of course, I've been detailing this with Jim for the last year or so, and I've actually even stopped reading certain sources. For a long time, I was reading the Kiev Independent and a few other news sources just to hear the garbage, but it got too much. Like when they discredited themselves twice in their own, they had two articles. I can't remember which ones it was, but they actually produced links. If you clicked on a link, it discredited their actual news report from their own paper. I'm like, who is this for at this point? Like, this is embarrassing, and I'm just not. I got other things to do than to bother with this. But this is the Western sort of mentality, and this is the news that gets filtered through. And of course, we know that every day is Russia's economy is collapsing, then it doesn't collapse, and Putin's dead and he's dying, and look at his hand now, and he's bloated and he's got the cancer again, and who knows what, all this stuff, as if Vladimir Putin dropped dead tomorrow, the war will be off. That'd be it. Good night, everybody. Peace in the East. So yeah, but you can speak directly on this, Conrad. What's the mood in Donbass, or I guess in Russia today, concerning the war and how it's being fought?
Yeah, you mentioned the economic stuff at the end. I can tell you again, like most of the world economy is sort of in a weird place right now, so it's not like it's not like anywhere has really been completely protected. But you go to Russia, you walk around Moscow, you go to places. There's no like economic collapse on the horizon. That's just not how things are. People are eating at restaurants. Fast food restaurants are open. People are out and about shopping just like anywhere else. And to have that with the war going on is actually extremely interesting and impressive. At the same time, in Donbass, I mean, the war there has been going on for over 11 years, and the people there, it's just how you live. I mean, I told the story on Buck's show about the missile that hit like 500 meters away from the monastery in that church service. Me and a few other people that were with were like, oh my gosh, like I'm looking over my shoulder. I was like, what the heck was that? And sure, they sent a guy out there, the National Guard guy out there to like look what happened and everything. But like the Metropolitan at the altar, he just like paused for like 3 seconds and just went right back into it. No one even looked. All the people in the audience there, all the parishioners there. I mean, these are people from Donetsk, and it was just like nothing. I was in New Chersones down in Crimea and Sevastopol, just outside Sevastopol, which, everyone, the guy that was there, Metropolitan Tikhon's guy that was showing us around, he told us that this area is like it's more protected than Israel. It's more protected than places in the United States with air defense and everything. And at one point we did hear, the air defense just, and then just drones just couldn't see it. It was farther down the coast, but we could just hear. And everyone else walking around was just walking around like nothing else was happening. And me and the guy I was with were like, "What the heck?" Like I'm looking around. Do I need to like take cover? And now it's obviously it's just how things go. So. Obviously, it's it's war. The Ukrainians have been consistently supplied with drones and weapons and missiles from the West. So it's not like it's just been a steamroll by the Russians. The Russians have just attritionally, they've taken slowly but surely, they've taken more and more. Like I said, it's been at this point well over 5,000 square kilometers since the beginning of 2025 has been taken, by the Russians. And the energy there is obviously people do want this war to end. They really want things to move a little bit faster. Because look, in Donetsk, I spent 4 or 5 days in Donetsk in a fairly nice hotel, but at least half the days of the week there's no running water because the Ukrainians have blocked off the canals in Slavyansk, and that's just terrible. Like this is a city of well over 1 million people, and you can't take a shower, you can't brush your teeth, you can't flush the toilet. Like it's really it's not good. And obviously the people there, they recognize that. I mean, there's memorials to the children that have been killed in the Ukrainian bombings, because even before the special military operation, these people know what it was like to be. I mean, they were an independent state technically. They were, they weren't even part of the Russian Federation, and they were, I went to Gorlovka to interview the bishop there, and there's entire museums dedicated to the young children that have been killed in these shellings over the years, like completely indiscriminate. And just a few weeks ago, they decided to hit center of Donetsk and center of Gorlovka right outside that museum where I had just been standing, and there's no military targets there at this point. It's well far back from the front line. It's just terrorism. It's just, the Ukrainians, they want to punish the people there because in their mind, they're the ones that caused all of this. The people that live in Donetsk and Lugansk, they're the ones that stood up against the Maidan in 2014. And so there is really this attitude of punishment. And so there's a big, in Russia and Donetsk, these people really, really want to they want the war to end so they can actually investigate all of the horrible things that were done to Donbass people after the Maidan, even before the Maidan, because so many, I mean, we've seen the videos of the women getting, the woman and the elderly people and their dog getting blown up by the drones. I mean, that was just, that was daily occurrence. That was happening all the time back in like 2014, 2015, when not everyone was wearing a GoPro. There were no drones. Nobody was, no one was talking about this on the news. In theory, the only news talking about it was talking about how, Ukraine was in the right to take on these pro-Russian rebels. So, the attitude is these people really want, they want justice to be served, and they want this thing to be over with. But at the end of the day, it's a tough situation because there's a bunch of people, that are in these territories that are now under Russia that unfortunately they still buy a lot of the pro-Ukrainian propaganda, and so the Russians have to engage in actual nation building and state. That's why only just the past few weeks and months they've decided to actually start hitting critical Ukrainian electrical infrastructure, hydroelectric dams, these sorts of things, because they didn't really want to do that. They didn't want to have the people that they integrate into their new territories feel that they were waging total war against them. They don't want to rule over territory that doesn't have functional infrastructure. They don't want to have to rebuild everything completely from scratch, even though they're obviously capable of doing it. I went to Mariupol. I mean, this was a city that was completely destroyed by weeks and weeks of intense modern warfare. And now, I mean, there's just hundreds and hundreds of new apartments everywhere, just very, new cathedral back under construction again after the, 5+ years of the Ukrainians, underfunding it and not actually finishing the big cathedral. So there's a lot of things happening there, 50,000 plus baptisms of soldiers, on the front line itself. A lot of those at one point, I think, were even prisoners that had, signed up to fight. So there really is, a lot. I heard some incredible stories about, I told a story about a guy who was a neo-pagan who we talked to, who, he was storming this point with these people, with his guys. He was a really young commander. He was only like 28, 29, but he was already like a commander of this. I don't know if it was, I'm forgetting what unit size he was a commander of, but he's storming this point, and then the machine gun catches him all up his leg. He's on the ground. They shot up his leg. He's not going to be able to make it. I think he got shot in the shoulder as well. He's on the ground. He realizes all his guys are getting picked off, so he calls in an airstrike. He calls a retreat. Everyone retreats. He calls in an airstrike on himself, and the airstrike goes down. And he basically, he sees the bombs blowing up. At one point, his stomach is ripped open. His intestines are outside of his body, so he can't even get up and walk at this point. But he says he heard a voice telling him get up and walk, and he somehow got up and walked, despite the fact that his guts are outside of his body, all this stuff. And he got up and walked, and then he wakes up in a military hospital, and he's someone bring me the priest. And he talks to the priest about what happened, and he realizes it was the Lord, it was Jesus Christ that saved him from this situation. And he was telling me the story, and he took this big bandage off his stomach, and it was completely, you could tell that at one point his guts were outside of his body. It's this entire scar tissue across his entire abdomen, and he has his prayer rope, and he's like, yeah, I've never let go of this prayer rope pretty much for the past several months, if not over a year, since it had happened. I can't remember the exact dates of how long it had been, but the thing was, he started telling the story. He had to he started totally having flashbacks and full PTSD episode. It was tough. That's why we didn't have the cameras rolling or anything, because it was he barely even agreed to tell us the story, but it was crazy. So I mean, there's so many stories like that. I've heard so much. The people are very religiously aware. There's a lot of again, the monastery where that missile nearly hit, it's completely destroyed. You can see it I've posted some videos about it and stuff. It's I mean, the inside, the ceiling is just plywood that they had to put up because the actual ceiling is completely destroyed, lets rain in. But the nuns and priests never stopped doing services there for the entire battle, even when on one side of the church were Russian soldiers, on the other side of the church were Ukrainian soldiers literally shooting each other. They never stopped doing the services. They never stopped the life. There were always a few people still there that never evacuated. So it's a very, the people there that care are pious, and they do, and these are some of the hardiest people you'll meet in the world at this point. And it was, and it's real. And obviously the most common symbol you'll find, more than the hammer and, besides maybe the actual Russian flag itself, but look, more than the hammer and sickle, more than, even any imperial thing, as much as I love all that stuff as well. You see a lot of it, but it's this, this is a military hat I got this is an Russian army hat I got in the Donbass, and this is what everyone's wearing. This is the
Mendelian.
Yeah, it's the Mendelian, and you see the red version more often than you'll see this one. But this is it's generally the most. If there's one thing that most people would agree on that they would want to kind of fight under, it's that. And again, even non-Christian people, even there's a Russian cultural identitarian element to it. But there's definitely I heard so many stories about no atheists in foxholes. People were atheists, people were secular, people were pagan. But by the time, after a few weeks of of getting shot at, next thing you know, they're like, all right, I think I got to meet with the priest now, and then things all start to fall into place. So, it's being there is it's a very surreal feeling, a very interesting feeling, and then going to New Chersones, this massive cathedral, cultural center, museum, outdoor church, Byzantine Empire city, recreation. It's an archaeological site, monastery. There's nothing like it anywhere else in the world, and it was built in a year and a half, crazy fast. It's got this incredible architectural thing to it, and it has tens of millions of pieces of mosaic. They built this massive cathedral in a Byzantine style to represent that this was once a Roman imperial outpost. That is also where Russia received its faith from. And circling it all back with John Vatatzis, we know that prophecy of Eldris Danushka of Siberia. From the people that gave us our faith, a Knyaz, a prince, will come. And I do think that is John Vatatzis. And there's also the prophecies that talk about how in Russia, before the Tsar, or there will be a figure that arises from the military. And I wish I had it right now. I have it. It's on my bed right over there. I have a quarter zip that I got that says Gabriel Doroshin on it, who I fortuitously and providentially ran into in the Donbass. I followed him for years, since 2022, since he sort of first became a known figure, the 8th great grandson of Tsar Nicholas I. He looks just like his great great uncle Tsar Nicholas II. He looks they're of a likeness with one another. And I ran into him, and I asked him about this, and he's very much aware of these prophecies. And people could watch my episode with him behind the paywall on my Substack. It's one of the things I'm most proud of that I've done recently, and he talks about all of this. And so I think going to this place and going to the war zone and connecting the dots with him and with the prophecies, it was an extremely surreal experience. So everything, as much as people that aren't Orthodox especially, and even a lot of Orthodox people think what we're talking about is absurd, it's real. I've lived it. I've been there.
Something that would be interesting, I know when Dimitri was discussing early on, when y'all were publishing some of the chapters of Russia Before the Second Coming and describing its the hopefulness of the people who would bury copies of that to make sure that it didn't get destroyed, or things like that. What was any of that? Was any of that mindset there for the people? What was it? Just a part of them? They already knew it. It's coming. These kinds of things, or was that not even a consideration? Was that ever discussed? You're muted.
You're muted, mate.
My bad. The pious people definitely were, and of course, these were regions that were heavily Sovietized because of the industry there. Mm-hmm. So prior to special military operation, prior to 2014, it was not necessarily the most religious area of Russia, Ukraine, of the Russosphere, and so that's obviously an issue. But anybody that really cared, even people that were just more deeply Russian nationalists, everyone knows Elder Zosima of Donbass. Elder who. He gave prophecies about all this stuff. I mean, he told the people, and I went to one of his monasteries, which is it's very blown out. It's miraculously preserved to the level that it has been, and his grave is there, and the town around it is completely destroyed. I didn't see a single house in the town that still had a roof, but there's still 84 people living there, and they would come to the monastery to get water. They would come to the monastery to get aid distributed to them and whatnot. The people that still stayed, and all those people in that town, all the people that they all knew, because Elder Zosima told them that you guys need to bury me like really, really deep under the ground, because these Banderites are going to come and they're going to try to desecrate, my corpse. He talked about how if you start to hear talk about the Ukrainian church separating from the Moscow Patriarchate, then that war is about to be at hand. He talks about how
there was a lot.
Yeah, right on this very spot, which at one point the monastery was occupied by Ukraine. There's going to be Banderites here, and all the people back in 1999 were like, Banderites, like, what are you talking about, man? Like, this is what are you saying? But it all came true, and he reposed in 2002.
It's strangely enough not surprising. I mean, I was hanging around with a lot of Christian nationalists, Ukrainian nationalists, back in the early to mid 90s. Briefly, I didn't pursue that very much because I saw at that time a lot of the ranks in Canada were full of anarchists, right? It was sort of the black flag anarchists, which later would become more Antifa and more, I think, what we're seeing in Ukraine, because they all went over. And once I got a sniff of anarchism or anarchists, I was like, "This is no, no. This is too close to communism. I don't know what you're all about." So it's not surprising to me that the Banderites have 2.0 have risen, because this was being discussed, in Toronto back in 1990, whatever it was, 4 or 5, or whatever, when I was talking to some people. So that's not at all surprising. I think what is getting interesting is the general cover up about Ukrainian fascists and all that stuff, and they're they're doing the whole LARP, but underneath it all is just it's all occultists, like all of it. It's satan, it's open satanic cults, to the point where Putin just made a big giant missive about going to essential war against global Satanism. And that was, when it hit the news, people kind of went, ha ha ha, and scoffed it off. But I'm like, no, not ha ha ha. Like, this is way bigger of a thing than denazification of Ukraine, which I always just took as code as, we're going to hunt down all these occult people and get rid of them. And, I speculated with Jim Jatras about this. It feels like feels like one large human sacrifice ritual that unfortunately Russia's playing a part in. Now, whether Putin's in on it or not, I mean, I don't know the man. I've gone back and forth on his character, but regardless, that's what's playing out. And it looks like Russia's now game plan is, we're going to break you. We're going to break you like we broke Georgia to a large extent, and we're certainly going to break you like we did with Chechnya. And by the end of this, there will be no more of this talk. Like, there'll be a massive purification of this. And I think, and maybe either one of you can tackle this one, because it's been whispered, and now I think we're going to start hearing a lot more of it in the 2026, is a substantiation of Novorossia. And then that gets really interesting, because that's your triumvirate.
There
is Belarusia, Russia, and Novorossia.
There's as you were talking about Zozima, I was thinking about this. There was so much that I had, and that I wasn't able to put into. So the first edition was that big, right? And there's the camera. The second edition became that big, and I wanted to cut it off at about 700 pages because it just becomes unwieldy. But there was so much other source material that I wanted to include prophecy wise from Elder Zozima, and that was if you don't mind, I'd like to share some of these that I haven't been able to put out. So a lot of this was kept by a Father Joseph, who's a hieromonk, and he would record Elder Zozima's homilies and provide. I guess he transcribed them later on, and some of these I found interesting. And I'm sure that y'all will too. So he mentioned this, and of course he reposed in 2002. He mentioned that God's wrath manifests as war, and this is all approaching very rapidly. We cannot avoid it. Whether you shout for peace or not, we are for peace. So what? What have we done with our actions? This fiery cup of God's wrath will fall on our heads. There will be trouble. We must repent, not just shout. And he also mentioned there will be betrayal of the church and the motherland. Indeed, betrayal of everything holy. Such turmoil will begin. It will start in Kiev and spread across our entire land. No one will be spared. There will be such madness around, but Russia will stand firm. No one will be able to overcome it, and there will be great grace there. Remember this: Orthodoxy will not only be preserved in Russia, and Orthodoxy will only be preserved in Russia, and only in the Russian Orthodox Church. That's all. Everyone will fall away from the Orthodox faith. All will be in such delusion. He continues on. Salvation will be found in the church, but pure faith will now only be in the Russian Orthodox Church. Everywhere else will be madness. He mentions that the Kiev Lavra will fall, and all the grace of the Kiev Lavra will transfer to Optina. And he says, I will not see to live this, but you will witness it. he mentioned a lot of what was going on then and in the future, and he mentioned there was I guess a book where some of this had been written, and there was a hieromonk Theophan who wrote some of this down, spoken 10 years before Maidan. Father Theophan says that Father Zosima said, "In Kiev, a hellish flame will be lit. The gates of hell will open, and demons will run through Kiev." He says, I'm simply a bearer of this information that may be useful to other people. That's why I'm here. In fact, that's the very reason why I'm speaking with you now. After that, a fiery wheel would roll to the east, and there would be a great war. Of course, talking about this, he mentions that Father Zosima warned him in advance that when he became president, there would be a dangerous situation where he would have to choose either follow Russia or as president, or go the way America tells him. Talking about Yanukovych. Sorry, to include that. And it continues on, and obviously we know what happened. The discussing about the prosecutor general under Yanukovych do something, because there are already hundreds of these training camps in Western Ukraine. People are preparing for war against the Russians and preparing to wipe out the Donbass. They are ready to fight against Russia, and they are being trained by the thousands. And of course, we know where that would be. There was also some mention that the Russian special operation would end in May. So that's another discussion there. But
May of this year or next year, you mean? Or
this next year.
Okay.
It would end in May, just a May. Let's see. There's quite a bit regarding some of the a lot of pro-Russian sentiment, obviously tied to the church there. But I just found that to be interesting. There's something that I have been running as a thought since publishing Russia Before the Second Coming, is that it describes a situation where Russia needs to reacquire its holy lands, its holy monasteries, and those are in the areas that they're retaking, and that would be almost a requirement for these next steps. And that's, when I look at it, that's exactly what I see, especially when you read the series of the Optina elders. There's a series of books, and as you go through those, it becomes more and more clear after reading Russia Before the Second Coming that is a part of this process, this cleansing, this reunification of Holy Rus.
It's interesting,
totally.
because Jim and I have been back and forth on it, and we've been sorry, Conrad. I'll do a brief. We've gone back and forth on it, and one of Jim's talking points about it is that Russia's war plan doesn't make sense in terms of this could have been over a while ago. So this has kind of brought us to the breaking points and all the rest of it. But if we just change our view on it slightly, and imagine if Russia imagines themselves as fighting a spiritual war or a holy war, then perhaps what they're doing is they're not trying to obliterate these areas and do this. Obviously they're doing mass. They're the meat grinder, right, for the Ukrainian forces, but at the same time they're trying to do as little damage as possible to these areas.
We should be careful talking about this, because we're all going to be called Russian shills tomorrow. For mentioning any of this. But but I think
I'm already.
Right.
It's too late for me on that front.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. You have a passport stamp that proves it.
Yeah. But I was going to say you mentioned, of course, these holy places. 2014 reunification of Crimea with Russia. They now have. Look, that's why they thought it was so important to build this new Chersones thing so fast and to protect it so strong with air defense, because the Ukrainians would love to blow it up, because it's literally a testament to Obviously,
Hmm.
this was Russia. This was literally where the Christian faith, the second Rome, handed the baton to Russia as the third Rome. This is where our grandfather was baptized. St. Vladimir is one of the greatest Russians. No one disputes that he's a Russian person. So it totally refutes the whole narrative of Ukraine, Ukrainian statehood,
Yeah.
this idea that Ukraine is a real political entity separate from Russia, the Russian Empire, Holy Rus. And then, of course, right now,
Listening to that, sorry to interrupt, listening to that Tucker Carlson interview, when I listened to that originally, I
Mhm.
I just was not thinking about any of this in some of the terms that I think about it now. And so about a month ago, I went back and re-listened to it, and it was just like a total flash of, oh, I was not thinking about this with the Orthodox frontima. I was not seeing some of these elements that I get it now. There's a reason why we spent 30 minutes discussing this,
yeah,
and even though that is in kind of like a political element, the religious element is one and the same. And he may not have uh, overtly stated that, but that is the way it is. Holy Russ is Russia.
yeah, and right now, literally, I mean, I don't know how far away the Russian troops are. I think it's just a matter of miles. At one point, it was under Russian territory, then it's gone back and forth with Ukraine several times. I mean, the Svyatogorsk Lavra, which is one of the three big lavras of Ukraine after Kiev Caves and Pochayev farther east. I mean, this is, in my opinion, the most beautiful monastery in the Orthodox world, potentially. It's incredible. If you watch any episode of Ether Hour, my show on YouTube, the pixel art is Svyatogorsk Monastery, so people
Mhm.
can know what it looks like there. And it's, again, these are places that are very important. The place that I was at, that where the missile almost hit, that was a monastery started by Elder Zosima of Donbass. It was dedicated to an icon, the Iveron icon of Donbass. The reason I was there was the bishop and several other bishops and dozens of priests were bringing this icon, which is a copy of the Iveron icon on Mount Athos that
Mhm.
was painted by a Russian iconographer at Panteleimon Monastery in Mount Athos and then brought to
Yep.
Donbass. It
Which
was
has
finally
a
returned.
very specific prophecy.
Yeah, yeah. The specific, and again, I'm almost thinking, how was what I was a part of, factor into that somehow. But
Yeah.
but this big, it's really big. I have the videos of it. If people see that video with the guys hauling the big icon through there,
Mhm.
it'd been away for 11 years because in 2014 they pulled the icon out of the monastery because it was on the front line. They were bringing the icon back. That was the occasion, that Tuesday morning where we were there at this, bombed out monastery with all these people, and it was. And again, this is a guy that gave prophecies about this. This is Russia pushing the Ukrainians farther and farther back. And again, I hope that the Kiev Caves Lavra eventually comes under Russian control. At this point, I don't know if that's exactly on the table, but clearly Svyatogorsk is about to be liberated, hopefully for the final time, and I think that's going to have real spiritual significance.
Yeah, I've read as much as I can, and in English. It's available in English, and then in the last 2 years moved into the Russian realm. And one of the most fascinating elements are the caves, and that's something that we don't really have a idea of how all of that took place, and some of this underground orthodoxy that was taking place during persecution. And that's something that we don't have, and the American mind doesn't understand warfare on our front doors yet, and we don't really have a concept of persecution because we've never had it. But that is some of the most amazing testimonies are those that were in the cave churches.
Well, and speaking of cave
Sorry.
churches, real quick, Jason, just before I
Yeah,
don't
yeah,
want to lose, I'll totally forget about
yeah.
this
Go ahead.
if I don't
Yeah,
say
yeah.
it right now. Was speaking of cave churches, I was in Crimea after I did all the stuff at New Chersones, drove 30 minutes with the people I was with to the monastery of Saint Clement. Saint Clement of Rome, I believe the third pope,
Hmm.
the Orthodox pope of Rome, who at one point was exiled to southern Crimea, which was again the far reaches of the Roman Empire at the time. And I have the pictures. I don't think I've posted many of them online, but I've made some videos about them very soon, and we'll be posting them. We went to a cave church that's been a cave church since 98 AD. It was where Saint Clement had been imprisoned. They had a huge piece of his skull there. They had big relics of Saint Andrew the First, called the apostle, who also made it to Crimea. And this is a church. It's still 3 times a week. It's still a liturgy. It's still there. And again, I'm sure under some communist times and some of the Muslim occupation times. There probably weren't liturgies there all the time, but as far as I was aware, this is potentially the oldest continually operating church in the world. It dates back to the first century AD. And the thing about Crimea, I mean, it really is it's a very important Christian place. It was, again, the far reaches of the empire, so at many points it was like the edges of Christendom. It was where the baton was handed off from the Romans to the Russians. And again, like so many saints, St. Andrew, St. Clement, so many of these people were there. And there were even miracle working icons of St. Nicholas. It was crazy. And the lady that was showing us around was like so excited to show these Americans, because she had, vaguely heard about Americans becoming Orthodox. But walking around Crimea, so many times people would hear us talking in English. They'd be like, "How are you here? Like, why are you here?" I mean, when I was in Donbass, the people I was with just told me just don't talk in English at all. It's just not a good look. So I mostly kept that to myself when I wasn't in the car or at the dinner table or whatever it was. But Crimea was, it's safer. It's not really much of a war zone. So we're walking around and people would just be like at one point we're eating at New Cheriston, and this guy comes up like, "My son is 14. He's learning English. Can he eat with you?" And like, we don't hear people talking in English. So like this kid sat down and had dinner with us and we talked to him in English. People would walk up to us and the lady was like so excited that we were there and everything. And this is, it's crazy because you can't fly there. The only way to drive there if you haven't been invited to the Donbass, because we drove down from Mariupol down to Sebastopol, which is not how most people get there. You got to go over the Kerch Bridge. We took the train back over the bridge. The train tickets are insanely expensive and they're super booked out because people don't want to drive across the bridge because there's like 6-hour waits on either side when you drive across the bridge. It's just brutal. And it's just terrible because this is a place that should be, in theory, a site of actually, well-known Christian pilgrimage. It's also just an incredibly beautiful part of the world. But instead, people were like, "Wow, English speakers are here," so crazy, because it's just a tough place to go, despite the fact that it's has some incredible, real Christian heritage. And like you said, some of the earliest examples of Christians being imprisoned in these caves, and that's why the churches were in the caves, because they were, because a saintly person was suffered for the faith here. So we should worship and we should have the sacraments here.
It's amazing.
Kenneth Wells asks, "What was the specific prophecy of that icon that you mentioned?"
Of the Ivory icon.
It's tough because I've been to Mount Athos and talked about it, and certain people, don't think it's authentic because it was from a much later spiritual son of Saint Nilos who had like a vision. So it's very controversial. Some people don't like talking about it.
I do. It is a strange thing. So I translated the posthumous revelations of Saint Nihilus, and I have not made that completely available. There's a portion of it that was originally published in Array of Light by Archimandrite Pantaleimon, that was done by Jordanville, and it's a very small book, and it has a section that is translated and published. And since that was translated and published, I went ahead and included all the relevant chapters and sections from the entirety. The entirety is like maybe about 900 or 1,100 pages. And I include a disclaimer. And I think Patrick did a video on this as well to go through that. So read any of that with that disclaimer in mind. But the idea is that when the Ivory icon is removed from Mount Athos, that Mount Athos will crumble into the sea. That's the simple of it.
And the Iveron icon is at Iveron Monastery, which is it at one point it had been removed and then miraculously came back. So it has all this.
Didn't it like they found it in the ocean or something?
Yeah, it was like floating on the ocean, like sitting up, like it floated back on the ocean. And in the Iveron icon, I mean, it might be. I don't want to say 100%. I don't know all the names of the sort of specific, because it's this Greek thing. Like there's the Iveron icon, and that's a type of way of depicting the Theotokos in Jesus Christ. It's like you've seen it before. Like it's very famous, specific. The way she's holding it, the way he's interacting with her. It's like top 3 most well-known kind of images of the Theotokos, and the Iveron icon is like it's the prototype.
Mm-hmm.
Gentlemen, we're coming up to almost an hour 40, so we can start wrapping things up. Any last thoughts on World War III, the Eschaton, end times, signs of the times? Anything we've covered, and of course, let the people know where you can consume your products. Any closing thoughts? Anything you want to throw in there? Jonathan, we'll start with you.
I have several books available on eschatonvigil.org, one of them being the second edition of the Eschatological Visions of the Blessed. There are some videos online already of that, and I'll be probably doing a show with Conrad before too long. I think we were hoping to get together to discuss just that and some of its content. There's also the Elders on the End Times, which is a Romanian text, and then the aforementioned Russia Before the Second Coming, which is an amazing text by Sergei Fomin. And I have several other texts that are available, translated but not published in physical copy, that are available on our website for members at eschatonvigil.org. We have I'm hoping to release a book on St. John Vatatzis here soon. It'll be in the beginning of next year, as well as the Demonological Visions of the Blessed sometime next year. And then, if I can find the time, I'd like to release the collected works of Sergei Nilis. That's one of the big Orthodox set of books that needs to make it into English. There's so many good ones. The Great and the Small, which would not be available on Amazon or anywhere else because of very specific set of texts that would be considered anti-Semitic. And then On the Banks of the River is another work of his that is absolutely amazing. And after we get those done in English, hopefully those will be available too. I think that's me.
And I just signed up. I just signed up to the Eschaton Vigil
Awesome.
as well. So
Thank you so
please
much.
go on, do that. Links are in the description below. So you go on down there and click on it and give the man your money and get you some. You can also just download a whole bunch of free stuff there as well. So
It is a nonprofit. It's a 501c3, so everything goes to the nonprofit. And right now, the big thing we use that for. We are having an icon of St. John Vatatzis produced by Veronica of NIGH Icons in Canada. Just doesn't.
Conrad.
No, I just want to say as well, I always consider Jonathan a kindred spirit. He's especially translating this work on St. John Vatatzis because, I've been like, there's just nothing in English on St. John Vatatzis, so that's why, some of my favorite shows we've done on Ether Hour, which, this is my transition into my pitch, worldwarnow.co. One of the best shows to watch if you want to get behind the paywall and support the show is the 2 episodes with Gregory Hears about St. John Vatatzis. We talk about his life, everything that he did when he was Emperor of Nicaea, and then episode 2, we talk all about the prophecies and the current state of the understanding of all of that. And there are still more texts in Greek that need to be translated, that need to be understood about this because the fullness of the tradition has not been broached in the English language. Going back to Greece, the next place that I want to go really bad, I want to go to Didymoteko. I'm making sure that I go there if I go back to Greece, no matter what happens, which is where St. John's relics were initially interred and buried. So that's where there's still a church dedicated to him. They celebrate the feast and everything. I really want to go there. But
I've been in communication with Ioannis Sosarkis, who wrote the 2 books on St. John Vatatzis, and they celebrate their Vatatzia on on the 4th of November, which we just passed his day.
No, I think maybe we need to organize a World War Now Eschaton Vigil collab pilgrimage. We bring some of the best people. We get like 20 people out there and do something, brainstorming.
Vatatzia 2026.
Yes. Maybe have a conference or something. But no, great stuff. And there's so many other books that I just wish that big publishers, the Orthodox seminaries, like the Life of Fyodor Ushakov. There's readily available in Russian on the internet. Just no one has decided to translate it into English. There's just it's just I could talk about this for hours about things that I wish are going to get translated because then I'll just start to get frustrated because I know I'm going to die before I can read all of them. But yeah, if you want to support World War Now, we're going to have Jonathan on to talk all about the latest Eschatological Visions book, go into the details on all of that. We've had him on the show in the past. It's great stuff. We have episodes with Father Peter Hears, episodes with Abbot Trifon about his spiritual father, episodes with Father John Whiteford. All sorts of incredible stuff. So if you get behind the paywall, worldwarnow.co, become an Ether Hour subscriber, you get access to all of that. You get access to subscriber-exclusive Discord chats on our Discord channel. You get access to Q&A threads that we try to do on a semi-monthly basis. You can ask whatever questions you want to be answered in detail, in full, in an episode. So worldwarnow.co. Also follow us on YouTube, just World War Now. If you type it in, our YouTube channel comes up. Follow us on X at World War Now _. Follow me on X at GnomeRad. Follow us on Telegram. That's a good place to find us as well at World War Now Telly. But yeah, Substack is our main home base. Whether you subscribe for free or become a paid subscriber, that's where your subscription and your input goes the farthest. So yeah, worldwarnow.co on Substack. It's always great to be on with Jason, and thank you for having us on. Meet the Blessed.
Yes,
you know,
thank you.
I'm
Always
blessed
my
to
pleasure,
be
my
here.
friend.
Blessed
Always
to
my
be
pleasure. Well, this is the platform now. It's going to be every week, or hopefully every week, and it's going to be an Orthodox show for Orthodox creators and content people, and whoever else wants to show up who's in the Orthodox orbit. Of course, it's not, the audience doesn't have to be Orthodox, but it helps. And this is was one part of full spectrum Orthodox dominance, and I'll be talking much more of that in 2026 and going forward, and building our infrastructures, because it is later than we think. So let's speed this up a little bit. And I'm getting older by the day. So if my back is any indication, I don't know how much time I got left, but whatever time I got left is going to be spending a little bit of suffering. So, but thank you to all the people who sent some super chats. Let's just read these out really quickly. Kenneth Wells with a big $10. Thank you very much. Oh, sorry. Mongo with a big £5. W guests, very, very, very W guests. We got $10 again from Kenneth. People who left the church to support the Bolsheviks was the kickstart of the Great Apostasy. Well, certainly, it was a kickstart of many things. £2 from Mongo. I was born in Romania. Pentecostal. You know my Jewish joke? You heard this one? My aunt Ira. She's half Jewish and half Episcopalian. We call her a pissy Jew. So Octavian's a new member. Thank you so much, Octavian. And of course, Whittakis to the big $5 Canadians. Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, mesdames and messieurs, brothers and sisters, comrades and fellow journeymen. Another $9 from Shoreline Skirt. Got a late hitting that reply now. That's all right. You can be late as long as you're here. Thank you, Shoreline. Thank you everyone who's liking and supporting the show. Thank you for all the guests. Thank you, Jonathan and Conrad. Thanks, Conrad, for putting Jonathan and I together.
Thanks, Conrad.
Come back next week. I'm Jason Mironchuck, and it's later than you think.